You are not supposed to be here. You were never meant to hear this story. And yet, here you are, drawn into the shadows, where truth is heavier than belief, and silence speaks louder than screams. In the winter of 1928, a young girl named Jonathan Miller's daughter, Evelyn, came into this world under circumstances so strange that even her birth certificate could not explain them. She was not sick. She was not weak. She was something else. At first glance, she seemed like any ordinary child, pale and quiet, born in a creaking farmhouse outside the town of Ashford, Pennsylvania. But those who looked closer noticed the eyes, enormous, glass-gray eyes that did not blink like a newborn should. They lingered, they studied, and when those eyes fixed on you, you felt exposed, as though the deepest compartments of your soul had been pried open without permission. Her father, Jonathan, a steel worker hardened by the furnaces of Pittsburgh, dismissed these things as childish exaggerations. Her mother, Catherine, a devout woman who clung to rosaries and whispered hymns at the kitchen table, was not so certain. She knew, she felt the difference, the unnatural weight in the room when Evelyn was present. By her second birthday, neighbors were whispering. She could recall entire conversations she should never have heard. She could repeat prayers in Latin she had not been taught. She stared at clocks not to read the time, but to calculate something no one else could see. What began as curiosity soon fermented into dread. Mothers clutched their children tighter when Evelyn walked past. The local priest, Father Henley, noted that during Mass, while every parishioner bowed their head in reverence, Evelyn did not move. She sat upright, unblinking, her lips moving in silent calculation, counting steps, syllables, breaths, heartbeats. And then came the first prediction. She told her mother in the softest voice, "The mill will burn before the bells toll twice." Catherine laughed, uneasy, telling her child not to say such things. But that very evening, as Ashford bell tower struck 9, fire consumed the north wing of the steel mill, killing 3 men and maiming 7 more. From that moment on, Evelyn was no longer a child in the eyes of Ashford. She was a warning, and warnings, when ignored, have a way of carving themselves into history with fire and blood. The town of Ashford was not a place for mysteries. It was a place of labor, soot, and repetition, where men worked themselves into early graves and women carried the burden of silence. Yet in 1928, that silence began to fracture, not with shouts, but with whispers of a girl who was not like the others. Evelyn Miller became a subject of conversation behind closed doors, her name spoken with lowered voices in taverns and kitchens alike. The Miller girl. They called her not Evelyn, not child, just the Miller girl, as if stripping away her name would strip away the unease she carried with her. Neighbors reported that she could not be startled. Thunderclaps, gunshots, even the scream of a dying pig at slaughter left her face unchanged, as though her mind had already calculated these noises before they came. Catherine swore that Evelyn often sat awake through the night, eyes fixed on the rafters, whispering numbers into the dark. One night, Jonathan, weary from the steel mill, demanded to know what she was muttering. "What do these numbers mean?" he barked, the smell of smoke and iron still clinging to him. Evelyn did not hesitate. "They are the numbers of endings, Father, the days left for each man in the mill. You have 2,487. Jonathan struck her for blasphemy, his hand trembling more from fear than anger. Yet afterwards, he found himself haunted by the number. He scratched into the back of his work ledger, unable to stop himself from counting down each day, each hour. Catherine prayed harder. Father Henley advised that the child be brought to church daily, bathed in Scripture. But prayer did not contain Evelyn. If anything, it seemed to sharpen her. Parishioners noticed her lips moving faster during Mass, her gaze fixed not on the crucifix, but on them, as if she were tallying every sin, every failing, every secret. Then came her second prophecy, this one not whispered, but announced. At the Sunday service, she turned to Mrs. Callahan, a woman known for her sharp tongue, and calmly said, "Your son will not return from the river." The congregation froze. Mrs. Callahan gasped, scolding Evelyn. But later that very afternoon, her boy Thomas drowned while fishing by the riverbank. Coincidence, they told themselves. It must be coincidence. But the fear was spreading, crawling under doors and into minds. Evelyn was not merely observing. She was deciding. And the people of Ashford would soon learn what happens when a community turns against a child who knows too much. Fear does not begin as a scream. It begins as silence. The silence of neighbors lowering their eyes, the silence of friends crossing the street, the silence of pews shifting away when you pass. Evelyn Miller grew up in that silence, and like every silence, it was hiding something darker. By the spring of 1929, the Miller household was no longer just another family home. It had become a subject of surveillance. Children were warned never to play near their yard. Shopkeepers served Jonathan and Catherine with tight lips, then locked their doors behind them. Even Jonathan's co-workers began keeping distance, muttering that his daughter's eyes could measure a man's grave before the dirt was even shoveled. Inside the house, the tension deepened. Catherine's prayers had turned desperate. She placed crucifixes in every room, sprinkled holy water across Evelyn's bed, and forced her to wear a rosary like a chain. But Evelyn accepted it all without resistance, sitting calmly in her narrow bed, fingers tracing each bead as though it were another calculation in her endless sequence. Jonathan, however, was less certain. The number 2,487 echoed in his head every day he walked into the steel mill. He told no one, but sometimes when the furnace roared, he swore he could hear Evelyn's voice repeating the countdown beneath the roar of fire and metal. The turning point came in April. Ashford was small enough that every tragedy left a scar across the whole community. But this tragedy bore Evelyn's shadow before it even struck. She told Catherine, without fear or hesitation, Mrs. Doherty's house will collapse in 3 days. Her mother slapped her this time, begging her to stay silent. But 3 days later, as the town gathered for a Sunday meal, Mrs. Doherty's chimney cracked and fell, crushing her as she stirred soup for her family. The town erupted. Whispers turned into accusations. Witch, devil child, unnatural. The words poisoned every street corner. And soon Catherine found herself unable to walk to the market without feeling spit strike her shoes. But Evelyn did not cry. She did not cower. She did not deny. She simply sat at the window, pale face pressed to glass, recording every glance, every step, every trembling hand that passed by. And one night, Jonathan found her leather notebook, its pages filled with numbers, names, and dates. At the top of the first page was one sentence, written in a child's uneven hand. I do not predict. I remember what has not yet happened. Ashford could no longer contain its unease. The girl with the gray eyes had become a wound in the fabric of town, and wounds left untreated always rot. It began with the night meetings. Men gathered after their shifts at the steel mill, not just to drink, but to whisper about Evelyn Miller. They spoke in low voices, glancing at the door, lowering their mugs when strangers walked in. Some argued she was a blessing in disguise, a child with the sight. Others insisted she was a curse, sent not from God, but from something older, something that had been waiting. Meanwhile, Catherine noticed changes in her daughter's behavior. Evelyn no longer answered questions directly. Instead, she spoke in fragments, numbers, times, coordinates that seemed meaningless until the events they described came to pass. One night, Catherine awoke to find her daughter standing barefoot in the kitchen, staring at the clock, whispering, 3, 3, 3. It is always 3. Jonathan tried to dismiss it as childish nonsense, but his hands shook as he held his coffee, remembering the numbers Evelyn had given him months before. His own countdown, his own approaching end. Then came the accusation. During a heated sermon, Father Henley told his congregation that unnatural gifts were temptations of the devil, meant to ensnare the faithful. His eyes flickered, unmistakably, to the Miller pew. By the end of that day, the whispers became a storm. The Callahans, the Webbers, the Daughertys, families who had all lost someone recently, joined together in suspicion, pointing to the child who seemed to know too much. And Evelyn, sitting quietly at the dinner table, simply said, "They're not afraid because I lie. They are afraid because I tell the truth." Jonathan slammed his fist against the table, ordering her to be silent, but her eyes lingered on him with cold certainty, and she added, almost in a whisper. "You have 2,439. It was the first time Catherine saw her husband pale. The number was dropping. That night, Jonathan confessed to his wife that he had been keeping track. Evelyn's prediction wasn't random. It was a clock, and every day it was ticking down. The air in their home changed after that. Every sound, every silence, every glance from Evelyn carried the weight of inevitability. And still, her notebook grew thicker, filled with secrets the town had buried and fates it had not yet faced. Because Evelyn was no longer merely observing Ashford. She was recording it, past, present, and future, as though time itself was her plaything. By summer of 1929, Ashford was suffocating under its own fear. The girl was no longer just a curiosity or even a curse. She was a mirror, and no one in town liked what they saw reflected. Evelyn spoke less and less to her parents. But when she did, her words carried the weight of inevitability. She recorded in her notebook daily, scrawling numbers and symbols with a precision far beyond her 11 years. Catherine once tore a page free in desperation, hoping to understand. It was filled with rows of dates, each followed by names, some crossed out, others waiting. When she asked Evelyn what it meant, her daughter replied without blinking, "They are the days people stop breathing. It is easier to write them down than to remember them all at once." Catherine burned the page in the stove, but Evelyn only rewrote it from memory, her handwriting flawless, her expression empty. Word spread that Evelyn could not be fooled. A farmer who had been stealing from his neighbor's land was confronted when Evelyn calmly announced, "You take 6 chickens every second Thursday. You bury the feathers near your well." The farmer's denial collapsed when the feathers were dug up in the exact spot she described. This was not divine. It was not holy. It was exposure. And exposure breeds hatred. The town's children began taunting Evelyn from afar, throwing rocks at the Miller house, chanting, which girl, which girl?" She never responded, never even flinched when a stone split her lip. Instead, she stared at them until one boy dropped his rock and ran, screaming that her eyes were like glass, like a mirror that knew. Jonathan grew harsher. He forbade Evelyn from leaving the house, locked her window at night, and even nailed her notebook shut in a drawer. But the next morning, it was back in her hands, filled with fresh pages. He accused her of stealing it back, but Catherine swore she had seen Evelyn asleep all through the night. And still, the prophecies came. Small ones at first, predicting rain, predicting accidents, predicting the loss of livestock. But then one evening, Evelyn spoke again, her voice steady, cold, almost rehearsed. 3 men will die before autumn, one by fire, one by rope, one by water. And I will not speak their names, because they already know who they are. The town did not laugh. The town did not forget, because in Ashford, prophecy had already proven itself fatal. When the first man died, some still called it coincidence. His name was Samuel Wright, a worker at the Ashford mill. One humid August evening, he fell asleep drunk near the furnace room. By morning, his body was found blackened, unrecognizable, the smell of charred flesh hanging in the rafters for weeks. Fire, Evelyn had said, won by fire. When news reached the town, Catherine begged her daughter to say it had only been a guess, a child's cruel imagination. Evelyn only turned a page in her notebook and whispered, "To remain." By then, even Jonathan no longer fought the truth. He carried himself like a man under a curse, drinking heavier, stumbling home later, staring at Evelyn as though she had already buried him with her words. He began carrying a small pocket Bible, though he never opened it, as though its mere presence could shield him. The second death came not long after. A man named Henry Dalton, who had been heard muttering most often against the Millers, was discovered hanging from the rafters of his own barn. His family swore he was not the type to take his life, but the rope was tied neat precise, like a calculation. Rope, Evelyn had said, won by rope. By this point, the town was unraveling. The taverns emptied early. The streets fell quiet by sundown. Men prayed openly. Women locked their doors, and children whispered dares about glimpsing Evelyn's eyes through her window. Ashford had stopped being a town. It had become a waiting room, holding its breath for the final death Evelyn had promised. It came on a night of torrential rain. The river swelled, dragging debris and livestock into its black current. When the water receded, the body of Michael Turner was found tangled among the reeds. His lungs were full of river water, one by water. The final name crossed out in Evelyn's ledger. 3 men, just as she had said. And now the whispers became shouts. Accusations raged, talk of exile or worse. Some demanded Jonathan take his daughter out of Ashford. Others demanded that he end it himself. Catherine clung to Evelyn, shielding her, but even she could no longer silence the thought gnawing at her heart. If Evelyn's words could summon death, then perhaps keeping her alive was the greatest danger of all. Autumn settled over Ashford like a shroud. The air grew colder, but the fear remained hot, an unspoken fever that clung to every porch, every pew, every whispered prayer. The Millers had become pariahs. Neighbors crossed the street when Catherine walked to the market. Jonathan's shifts at the mill grew shorter, his co-workers turning their backs on him, tools dropping silent when he entered the room. No one wanted the girl's father near the furnace. No one wanted her shadow touching theirs. Inside the house, the family unraveled. Catherine prayed constantly, hands blistered from clutching the rosary. She left bowls of salt in the corners of rooms, marked crosses above every doorway, burned sage until the air choked them. Yet Evelyn sat unmoved, scribbling in her notebook, her face lit by the thin flame of a candle. Jonathan, meanwhile, drowned in drink. He could not stop counting the days Evelyn had promised him. Each night, he scratched another mark into the wood of the dining table, like a prisoner etching tally marks in the wall of a cell. Catherine begged him to stop, but he only muttered, "If I don't keep count, she will." And Evelyn only grew stranger. She spoke less, but when she did, her words cut deeper than ever before. One evening, Catherine found her sitting at the window, watching the wind scatter dead leaves across the yard. Without looking away, Evelyn whispered, "They think they can stop me. They don't understand. I don't choose what I see. I only carry it." "Carry what?" Catherine asked, her voice shaking. Evelyn finally turned, her gray eyes empty, cold, reflecting the candlelight like silvered glass. The rest of their lives. That night, Catherine dreamed of her daughter standing in a graveyard, every headstone carved not by stonecutters, but by Evelyn's own hand. Each name written before the body was even lowered into the earth. The dream felt less like imagination and more like prophecy. And as the leaves fell, the townsfolk reached a decision. If Jonathan would not act, then Ashford would. The meeting took place in the basement of the church. Lanterns burned low, their light casting long shadows on stone walls that seemed to listen. Every family sent someone. Farmers with callous hands, mill workers with faces blackened by soot, mothers with grief carved into their skin. At the center stood Father Henley, Bible in one hand, a length of rope in the other. His voice trembled with both authority and fear. "We are a town under siege," he declared. "Not by flesh, not by steel, but by a child who bears the mark of damnation. Scripture tells us that the devil wears many faces, and sometimes it is the face of innocence." Murmurs rippled. Some nodded. Some wept quietly. Others clenched their fists. One man finally spoke. 3 deaths she named, and 3 deaths came. "Tell me, Father, what happens when she names more?" Henley said nothing at first. He only set the rope down on the altar, letting the silence hang heavy. Then, with his jaw tight, he answered, "Then more will die, unless we put an end to it." Catherine, though not present, felt the shift in town that very night. Neighbors stopped meeting her eyes. Children no longer threw stones. They avoided her entirely, as though she carried contagion. And when she passed the church, the bell tolled though no service was scheduled. It sounded like a warning. Jonathan pretended not to notice. He drowned himself deeper in whiskey, muttering about numbers. But Catherine knew. She could feel it. Something was coming for Evelyn, and yet Evelyn herself remained unshaken. When Catherine asked if she was afraid, the girl replied calmly, "They cannot stop what has already been written. They only decide how cruelly they wish to play their part." Then she added, almost like a knife sliding between ribs, And when they come for me, you must choose. Protect me or protect yourself. That night, Catherine lay awake beside her husband, listening to the sound of Evelyn's pencil scratching in the dark. A sound not of childhood, but of judgment. And in the distance, the church bell tolled again. Though no hand pulled its rope, be why the first frost, Ashford was no longer whispering. It was preparing. Men sharpened axes not for wood, but for courage. Women gathered salt and holy water, not for blessings, but for war. Father Henley preached sermons that grew darker each Sunday, hammering the words, "Deliver us from evil," until his throat went raw. The Millers felt it. Their house, once filled with the hum of ordinary life, became a fortress of silence. Windows latched, doors barred, candles burned long into the night. Catherine barely slept. Jonathan barely spoke. And Evelyn only wrote, page after page. One morning, Catherine tried to seize a notebook. She snatched it from Evelyn's hands and pressed it against her chest, refusing to look at what was inside. But Evelyn did not fight. She only stared, and in that stare Catherine felt the awful weight of inevitability. "Open it," the girl whispered. "No, then I will tell you without it." Evelyn's voice was low, cold, like stone grinding against stone. "Before the winter ends, one of us will not see spring." Catherine's heart seemed to stop. She dropped the book as though it burned her, and Evelyn calmly picked it up, smoothing the pages, returning to her work. That night, Catherine begged Jonathan to leave Ashford. "We can run. We can disappear. Take her somewhere they don't know her name. Please." But Jonathan only laughed, bitter and broken. "Do you think you can run from God's curse? From his ledger? No, Catherine. She's already written us into the ground." And still, Catherine tried. She packed a small bag, slipped food into cloth, whispered prayers as she prepared to flee with her daughter before the town struck first. But when she opened the door, Evelyn was already standing there in the threshold, notebook under her arm. She looked at her mother with something that was not quite pity. "You cannot leave, Mama," she said softly. "The ground here is already hungry. It wants what has been promised." And in that moment, Catherine realized the most terrifying truth of all. It was not just a town that was bound to Evelyn's prophecies. It was them. The night Catherine tried to flee was the night the town came for them. It began with footsteps, dozens of them, crunching over frostbitten ground. Then came the lanterns, glowing like a line of fireflies winding toward the Miller house. The wind carried murmurs, prayers, and the metallic clatter of tools repurposed into weapons. Jonathan heard them first. He rose from his chair, whiskey still wet on his lips, and staggered to the window. When he saw the lights, his face drained of all color. "It's time," he whispered, not in anger, not in surprise, but in surrender. Catherine rushed to bar the door, dragging furniture across the threshold, her hands trembling. "They'll kill her, Jonathan. We can't let them." But Jonathan only shook his head. "Maybe they're right. Maybe this ends with her blood. Or ours." Evelyn, who had been sitting silently in the corner, finally rose. She tucked her notebook beneath her arm and stepped into the center of the room, her pale face catching the lantern glow seeping through the shutters. "They will not kill me," she said calmly. "They cannot. They will only play their parts." The first strike rattled the door. Wood splintered. Catherine screamed, clutching Evelyn close, but the girl did not flinch. Her heartbeat was steady, her breath even. A second strike. The hinges groaned. Voices rose outside. "Witch, devil's child, deliver us from her." Jonathan picked up his Bible, but it trembled in his hands. He looked at his daughter with hollow eyes and whispered, "God, forgive us." Then the door gave way. The townsfolk flooded in, faces twisted with terror and rage, ropes and axes raised. Catherine shielded Evelyn with her body, sobbing, begging them to stop. But Evelyn only stared at them, her voice rising above the chaos like a bell in the storm. "You cannot kill what has already been written." And at those words, the first man who dared touch her dropped dead on the threshold, his lantern crashing to the floor, fire licking at the wooden planks. The mob froze. The fire spread, and Ashford crossed the threshold into madness. The fire spread quickly, licking the walls of the Miller home, turning the air thick with smoke. Screams filled the night, not from Evelyn, not from Catherine, but from the townsfolk who had come as executioners and now found themselves trapped in judgment. The man who had fallen dead at Evelyn's feet lay twisted in the doorway, his eyes wide, his mouth frozen mid-prayer. No wound marked him, no blood spilled. It was as though his heart had simply stopped at the sound of her voice. Panic shattered the mob's courage. Some turned to flee, but the door was clogged by the lifeless body of their companion. Others dropped their weapons and stumbled back into the yard, lanterns spilling oil into the snow. The fire roared higher, devouring the dry wood, painting the night in orange fury. Catherine clutched Evelyn, dragging her toward the back of the house, desperate to escape the inferno. But Evelyn did not move like a child being saved. She moved like a prophet being led exactly where she meant to go. Her calmness was unbearable, her stillness inhuman. Jonathan stood frozen in the center of the chaos, the Bible hanging from his hand. His lips moved in silent prayer, but his eyes never left Evelyn. In the reflection of the flames, he saw not his daughter, but something else, something that had borrowed her shape. When Catherine finally wrenched open the back door, the cold air rushed in, carrying with it the sound of the church bell. It tolled wildly, though no hand pulled the rope, each strike a hammer doom echoing across Ashford. Outside, the remaining townsfolk fell to their knees in the snow, some praying, some screaming, some clawing at their own faces, as though they could tear away the visions Evelyn had placed inside their skulls. And Evelyn only whispered as the flames consumed her home. One by one they will fall, until the ground is satisfied. The night ended not with victory, not with justice, but with firelight reflecting off 100 terrified eyes. Ashford had not rid itself of the curse. It had only fed Itede be wide dawn. The Miller house was nothing more than a blackened skeleton, smoke curling into the pale winter sky. Ashford stood in silence, its people gathered in the snow, faces ashen, eyes hollow. The dead man's body was pulled from the ruins, his skin untouched by fire though the house had burned around him. His expression remained frozen, mouth agape, as though he had seen something unspeakable in the final instant of his life. None dared to close his eyes. Catherine stood apart from the others, her arms wrapped around Evelyn. The child was unburned, untouched, her dress still smelling faintly of smoke but otherwise whole. She did not shiver in the cold. She did not weep. She only stared at the ground as though she could hear something moving beneath it. Father Henley approached slowly, his robe singed at the edges, his Bible clutched so tightly the leather cracked. He looked at Evelyn not as a priest, not even as a man of faith, but as a soldier staring down an enemy he knew he could never defeat. "This is not the work of man," he muttered. "This is the mark of something older, something that wears her skin." Jonathan, hollow-eyed and silent, said nothing. He simply turned his back on the smoldering wreck of his home and began to walk toward the church. His steps were slow, unsteady, but there was purpose in them. Catherine called after him, but he did not turn. Evelyn only watched, her face unreadable. The townsfolk began to scatter, some to their homes, others to the churchyard, but none returned to their beds. No one slept that day. Ashford's air was heavy with the stench of fear and smoke, and in every corner of every room, candles burned against the shadows. That night, Catherine dreamed of soil shifting, of roots curling around bones deep underground. She awoke with dirt beneath her fingernails, though she had not left her bed. Beside her, Evelyn sat awake, her notebook open on her knees. 3 more, the girl whispered without looking up. 3 more before the thaw. And when Catherine tried to take the notebook, she saw the names, familiar names, men and women who had stood in the snow the night before, already marked, already doomed. The next death came swiftly. On the second night after the fire, Thomas Keene, the blacksmith who had shouted the loudest for Evelyn's blood, was found in his forge. His body lay sprawled across the anvil, eyes wide, mouth filled with ash though no coal fire had been lit. His hammer rested in his lifeless hand, as though he had tried to strike some unseen enemy before his breath was stolen. Word spread through Ashford like a plague. Men whispered, women wept, children were kept behind locked doors. But no lock could keep out what they feared, for Evelyn's prophecy was not made of flesh and blood. It was written, and once written it became truth. Catherine tried to deny it, tried to protect her daughter from the whispers, but the truth weighed on her shoulders heavier each day. She had seen the names in the notebook. Thomas Keene was the first. 2 more remained. And Evelyn was changing. Her eyes lingered too long in silence. Her voice carried a gravity beyond her years. Sometimes Catherine would wake in the night to find Evelyn standing at the window, her breath fogging the glass, her lips moving in some quiet chant she could not hear. Jonathan, meanwhile, had become a shadow. He did not return to the house after the fire. He slept in the church, kneeling before the altar, his Bible open, his prayers endless. Some said he was preparing for a final confrontation with his daughter. Others whispered he had already lost his faith and was bargaining with something darker. When Catherine begged him to come home, he only shook his head. This is no home. This is a battlefield, and she is not our child anymore. The bell tolled again that night, slow, steady, though no one dared touch the rope. And in the silence that followed, Catherine realized the town had become a graveyard before the graves were even dug. Ashford was not waiting for death. It was counting down to it. The town gathered in the church that night, every pew filled with trembling bodies. The air reeked of sweat, smoke, and a faint stench of fear that clung to the walls like mildew. Children whimpered quietly in their mothers' arms. Men sat stiffly, hands clasped, their eyes darting toward the door at every creak of the wooden beams. At the front, Jonathan Miller stood beside Father Henley. He looked hollowed out, a man stretched thin by dread. His Bible was open in his hands, but he did not read from it. He only stared at the congregation, his lips pale and trembling. Father Henley raised his voice over the uneasy murmurs. Brothers and sisters, this is not the hour for weakness. We face a darkness, yes, but it is not greater than the Lord Almighty. But even as he spoke, the words rang false. Everyone had seen Thomas Keene's corpse. Everyone knew the curse had begun its harvest. Catherine entered late, her arm wrapped tightly around Evelyn. The congregation stiffened. Some shifted away in their seats. Others crossed themselves. Mothers pulled their children closer. Evelyn walked calmly down the aisle, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor, her notebook clutched against her chest. She stopped halfway to the altar and turned her gaze on the crowd. The church fell into a suffocating hush. "You cannot pray it away," she said softly, though her voice carried to every corner. "You cannot burn it away. The names are written, and when the ground thaws, it will open." Gasps rippled through the pews. One old woman wailed aloud, clutching her rosary so tightly the beads snapped and spilled across the floor like tiny bones. Father Henley slammed his fist onto the pulpit. "Silence, child. You will not speak lies in the house of God." Evelyn tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Then why does your God not answer you?" Jonathan gripped the Bible until his knuckles whitened. He looked at his daughter with eyes full of sorrow, and for the first time, he did not try to deny her words. The bell tolled again, though no hand touched it. Slow, heavy, funereal. And in that moment, the people of Ashford knew the church was no sanctuary. It was a waiting room for the grave. The second death came as Evelyn had foretold. Martha Clay, the midwife, was found at dawn in her cottage. She had delivered half the children in Ashford, had been present at nearly every birth for 30 years. Her hands, once steady and skilled, were now clenched in rigid fists. Her mouth gaped open, her tongue blackened as though she had drunk poison. But no poison was found, no struggle, no sign of intrusion. Her face was twisted toward the window, frozen in terror, as though she had seen something watching her from the darkness outside. The news spread quickly. Whispers turned to sobs, sobs to curses. Some cursed Evelyn. Others cursed Jonathan for bringing her into the world. And a few cursed the earth itself, for they believed the ground beneath Ashford had grown hungry. Catherine tried to shield Evelyn from the hatred of the town, but the girl only wrote more names. Each stroke of her pencil seemed final, carved into fate itself. "You can't," Catherine whispered, trembling as she snatched the notebook from her daughter's lap. "You can't decide who lives and who dies. Evelyn did not fight her. She only looked up at those unblinking eyes and said, "I don't decide. I only see. And soon you will see, too." That night, Catherine burned the notebook in a hearth, watching the pages curl and blacken, the words devoured by flame. For the first time in weeks, she slept without fear. But in the morning, the notebook was back on Evelyn's bed, untouched, unburned. The ashes in the hearth were gone. And on the newest page, in fresh handwriting, a third name had appeared, the final name, someone still living, someone soon to die. The name written on that page was one Catherine could not bear to speak aloud. It was Jonathan. She stared at the letters, each stroke neat, deliberate, as though carved into the paper by something more than a child's hand. Her breath hitched, her chest tightened. She wanted to rip the page free, to tear it into shreds, to burn it again and again until not a trace remained. But she knew now, nothing she did could erase what Evelyn wrote. She held the notebook in trembling hands and went to the church, where Jonathan knelt at the altar. His head was bowed, his voice hoarse from endless prayer. When she placed the book before him, he looked up, his eyes darkened as they fell upon the name. For a long while he said nothing. His lips moved silently, but no prayer came. At last, he touched the page with shaking finger. "So it ends with me," he whispered. "Perhaps that is justice. Perhaps that is mercy." Catherine grabbed his arm, her voice breaking. "No, we can leave. We can take Evelyn and go far from here. This town is cursed to Jonathan, but we don't have to be." But Jonathan only shook his head. "It will not follow the town. It will follow her. It will follow us. There is no fleeing this, only facing it." His words filled her with ice. She clutched his sleeve, desperate, but he pulled away and stood. His shadow stretched long across the church floor, a broken figure against the candlelight. That night, Jonathan did not return home. He remained in the church, standing vigil as the storm winds howled outside. And in the Miller home, Catherine awoke to the sound of Evelyn whispering in the dark. She lit a candle and found her daughter sitting at the foot of the bed, eyes wide open, staring into nothing. When Catherine asked what she saw, Evelyn turned her head slowly, her lips curving into something between sorrow and a smile. "He's already gone, Mother. He just doesn't know it yet." The storm that night was unlike any Ashford had ever seen. Rain lashed against the windows. Thunder cracked like cannon fire, and the wind screamed through the trees with the voice of 1,000 souls. The townspeople huddled in their homes, clutching rosaries and Bibles, whispering prayers they were no longer certain would be heard. In the church, Jonathan stood before the altar, his candle nearly spent, his Bible open but unread. He stared at the crucifix, his lips moving in a silent argument with God. He begged for strength, for clarity, for a sign. And the sign came, though not from heaven. The great wooden doors of the church creaked open, though no hand touched them. The storm howled into the sanctuary, extinguishing the last of the candles. Jonathan was swallowed in darkness, save for a single pale figure standing in the aisle. Evelyn. Her white dress clung to her small frame, soaked through with rain, yet she moved silently, as if the storm itself parted for her. She clutched the notebook to her chest, her eyes glimmering with a light not born of this world. "Father," she whispered. Her voice was not cruel, nor mocking. It was heavy, as though it carried centuries within it. "The page is written. Do not fight it." Jonathan raised the Bible like a shield, his voice breaking. "You are not my daughter. Whatever wears her face, leave this place." Evelyn tilted her head, her wet hair hanging across her cheeks. "You prayed for salvation. But salvation does not always come with light. Sometimes it comes with fire, sometimes with death." Jonathan staggered back, clutching the Bible tighter. His heart thundered in his chest, louder than the storm. "If I must die, let it be by his hand, not yours." Evelyn stepped closer. The church bells began to toll, slow and deliberate, though no rope moved. Each strike echoed like a death knell through the hollow sanctuary. Catherine, rushing through the storm, would later swear she heard those bells from miles away. By the time she burst into the church, Jonathan lay at the foot of the altar. His eyes were open, his mouth agape, his hand still clutching the Bible. Evelyn knelt beside him, her fingers brushing his hair. She looked up at her mother with tears streaking her pale face. "He's free now," she whispered. "He doesn't have to see the rest." The death of Jonathan Miller broke something in Ashford. The town buried him in the churchyard, the ground still wet from the storm. No hymns were sung. No words of comfort were spoken. The people gathered in silence, their eyes darting between Catherine and the child who stood at her side. Evelyn did not cry. She did not flinch. She only held her notebook against her chest, as though it were scripture more sacred than any Bible. When the coffin was lowered into the earth, a crow landed on the wooden cross that marked the grave. Its cry pierced the silence, sharp and mocking. Several townsfolk gasped, muttering about omens, about curses. One man spat into the dirt and muttered that the Millers should never have come to Ashford. That night, Catherine sat alone by the fire, her face hollow, her hands trembling as she tried to sew torn cloth. But her eyes kept wandering to Evelyn, who sat in the corner, watching the flames. "Why him?" Catherine whispered at last. Her voice cracked. "Why your father?" Evelyn's eyes did not leave the fire. Because the ground wanted him. Because the ground always gets what it wants. Catherine's breath caught. The ground. Evelyn turned to her then, her face illuminated by the firelight. Her voice was soft, but her words were sharper than any blade. "It is not God who listens here. It is the earth. It has been awake for a long time, Mother. And it is hungry." Catherine's hands froze on the fabric. Her heart thudded violently in her chest. For a moment she wanted to scream, to run, to shake the truth out of her child. But Evelyn had already turned back to the fire, her small figure still, her eyes reflecting the flickering light. In that silence, Catherine realized something terrifying. The notebook was not Evelyn's burden. It was the earth's voice, and her daughter was only its hand. Sleep abandoned Catherine in the weeks that followed Jonathan's death. Each night she awoke to the sound of scratching, soft, deliberate, like quills on parchment. Rising from her bed, she would find Evelyn hunched over the notebook, her small hand gliding across the page though her eyes were closed. She did not write as a child. She wrote as something possessed, each letter etched with unnatural precision. Catherine tried to take the notebook away. Each time, she failed. It was not Evelyn who resisted. It was the book itself. The moment it left her daughter's hands, it grew heavier, burning hot, until Catherine dropped it, gasping. And always, it found its way back to Evelyn's lap before dawn. The names inside multiplied. Men, women, children. People who still drew breath by day, but would soon be corpses by night. Catherine watched the list grow with mounting horror. But when she begged Evelyn to stop, the child only whispered, "I don't choose, Mother. I only listen." The deaths came as written. One by one, the town's graveyard swelled with fresh earth. A boy drowned in the river, though he could swim better than most grown men. An old widow was found lifeless in her chair, her mouth filled with dirt. A farmer was trampled by his own cattle. Though no gates had been opened, the people no longer whispered. They shouted. They cursed Catherine in the streets, threw stones at her door, spit on the ground where Evelyn walked. The pastor declared the child an abomination, a vessel of something profane. But Catherine clung to her daughter, torn between terror and a mother's desperate love. Late one night, after another burial, she collapsed before Evelyn, sobbing. "Tell me how to stop this. Tell me what it wants, so I can make it end." Evelyn closed a notebook and lifted her pale face. For the first time, her eyes seemed almost human, filled with sorrow that no child should bear. "You cannot stop it," she said softly. "You can only feed it. And soon it will want more than Ashford." The people of Ashford reached their breaking point. By the spring of 1838, the graveyard had grown so crowded that fresh mounds of earth spilled beyond the stone walls. Every week, another life was taken. Every week, Evelyn's notebook grew heavier. The townsfolk gathered in secret. They no longer spoke of curses in hushed tones. They shouted of retribution, of purging the evil that had rooted itself in the Miller home. Their plan was not whispered prayer. It was blood. One night, Catherine awoke to the sound of footsteps outside. She rushed to the window and saw the glow of torches moving through the streets. Voices rose like a thunderous tide, chanting for fire, for cleansing, for the death of the child they called the devil's handmaid. Evelyn did not flinch. She sat calmly at the table, the notebook before her, her hand already writing. "Run," Catherine whispered, grabbing her daughter's arm. "We have to run." But Evelyn only shook her head. "It won't matter, Mother. They cannot kill me." The door shuddered as fists and boots struck it. The windows rattled under thrown stones. Catherine screamed for them to stop, her voice drowned beneath the mob's fury. The pastor's voice rose above the chaos, declaring judgment upon the house. At last, the door burst inward. Men surged inside with ropes and axes, their eyes wild with fear and rage. They seized Evelyn, though she did not struggle. She looked upon them with an eerie calm, her notebook falling to the floor with a heavy thud. Catherine fought, clawing and screaming, but she was struck aside. She crumpled to the floor, her vision swimming, her ears ringing with the mob's howls. They carried Evelyn to the square, where a pyre had already been built. The wood was stacked high, soaked with oil. The townsfolk bound her to the stake, their hands trembling but resolute. The flames were lit. The fire roared to life, a blazing wall of orange and black. Catherine stumbled from a house, dragging herself into the crowd, screaming her daughter's name. She watched as the smoke rose into the night sky, but then the screaming changed. It was no longer Evelyn's voice. It was the town's. The flames did not consume Evelyn. The fire roared higher and higher, sparks spiraling into the black sky, the heat searing the faces of the crowd. Yet at the heart of the pyre, the child did not burn. Her white dress turned to ash, but her flesh remained untouched. She stood bound to stake, her head bowed, her lips moving as though in prayer. Then the ground beneath the square began to tremble. The cobblestones cracked. Dust poured from between them, as if the earth itself was exhaling. The people stumbled, some falling to their knees, clutching one another as the trembling grew to a violent shudder. Evelyn lifted her head. Her eyes glowed with a pale, unnatural light. Her voice rose above the roar of the fire, calm and steady, carrying across the entire square. "You cannot burn what is already written." The flames twisted, turning black, curling inward instead of out. They did not rise, they fell. The fire licked down the wooden stake and seeped in the ground like ink spilling across parchment. The earth split open with a deafening crack. From beneath the town square came a sound no human throat could make, an ancient, guttural groan that seemed to echo from the core of the world itself. The mob screamed in terror, scattering, but there was no escape. One by one, the names in Evelyn's notebook came to life. The crowd gasped as men and women clutched their chests, their bodies collapsing into the dirt. The air reeked of smoke and iron, of soil freshly turned. Catherine pushed through the chaos, tears blinding her vision. She reached the base of the pyre just as the ropes binding Evelyn turned to ash and fell away. Her daughter stepped down from the stake, barefoot, untouched, the notebook somehow already in her hand once more. The crowd had fled, but the square was littered with bodies, friends, neighbors, even the pastor, his lifeless eyes staring at the sky. Evelyn turned to her mother and spoke with a voice that was no longer a child's. "Ashford is finished, Mother. The page is complete." The night after the pyre, Ashford was silent. No dogs barked. No children cried. The streets that once teemed with gossip and trade now lay empty, choked in smoke and ash. Doors hung from broken hinges, windows shattered. The town, once alive with suspicion and fear, had become a graveyard. Catherine wandered the square, her footsteps echoing on the stones slick with soot. She counted the bodies, dozens, maybe more. Faces she had known for years, neighbors who once brought bread, women who once shared whispers, men who once tipped their hats. Now, all lay cold, their names already crossed out in a notebook that Evelyn carried pressed to her chest. "Why?" Catherine begged, her voice hoarse. She grabbed Evelyn's shoulders, shaking her. "Why must it take them all? Why must it take anyone?" Evelyn's gaze was steady, almost pitying. Because they belong to the earth now. Their names were called, and the earth does not forget. It remembers everything. Even you. Catherine froze. Me. Her daughter nodded slowly. The page is not finished, Mother. It never will be. You are not spared. You are only waiting. The words hollowed Catherine's chest. She fell back, clutching her heart, staring at the child she no longer recognized. Evelyn turned away, walking to the edge of the square where the soil had cracked open. From the fissure seeped a faint glow, pulsing like a heartbeat. She knelt by it, her tiny fingers brushing the dirt with reverence. "It's awake now," she whispered. "It knows your name, too." Catherine collapsed to her knees, her sobs echoing through the abandoned streets. She wanted to flee, to take Evelyn and run far from the cursed soil of Ashford. But in her heart, she knew there was no escape. Wherever Evelyn walked, the earth followed, and the earth was hungry still. The strangers who came to Ashford did not leave. When their names bled onto the page, they staggered, clutching at their throats as though invisible hands strangled the breath from them. Their bodies fell where they stood, lifeless before they even struck the ground. The book closed itself with a violent snap, and Evelyn looked up, her face illuminated by the dying glow of the fissure. Catherine screamed. She fell to her knees beside the corpses, shaking them, begging for life to return. But it never did. The soil drank their blood as though the earth itself had been waiting for the sacrifice. "Stop!" Catherine cried, turning on her daughter. "Please stop this." But Evelyn only tilted her head. "I am not doing it, Mother. They write themselves. I only carry the page." Her words chilled Catherine's blood. She realized with horror that the book had a will of its own. It was not Evelyn's power. It was Evelyn's burden, and perhaps her prison. By the following weeks, no one dared to cross Ashford's borders. The town became a forbidden place, a scar upon the map, avoided by all who valued their lives. Stories spread of lights in the night, of whispers carried on the wind, of a girl seen standing among graves that stretched farther each season. Catherine, broken and hollow, clung to Evelyn despite everything. She could not abandon her child, even as the shadow of death clung to every step she took. Late one evening, as Catherine sat weeping in the remnants of her kitchen, Evelyn approached silently and placed a notebook on the table before her. "It's not only names," she said softly. Catherine looked down, her breath catching. The ink no longer formed a list of the dead. It drew shapes, symbols that shifted and writhed, diagrams of things no human hand should have been able to create. And beneath them, in jagged script, were words that Catherine could not read, but could understand. The words spoke of what came next, not the end of Ashford, the end of everything. The words burned themselves into Catherine's mind. They were not written in any language she had ever known, yet their meaning seeped into her bones like cold water. She understood them the way one understands a scream in the dark, instinctively, without needing translation. They spoke of a door buried deep within the earth, a door that had been sealed for centuries, perhaps millennia, a door that the book itself was trying to open. Catherine shoved the notebook away, her hands trembling. No, this cannot be true. This is madness." Evelyn watched her quietly, her pale face lit only by the dying glow of the hearth. "It is not madness, Mother. It is promise. The earth remembers. The earth waits. It wants to be whole again." Catherine's voice rose, desperate, breaking. "Whole with what? What is it calling?" The child lowered her gaze, whispering so softly that Catherine had to lean close to hear. "The one that sleeps beneath us." That night, Catherine dreamed of it. A vast shape buried under endless soil, coiled in silence, its form too massive to comprehend. It did not move. It did not breathe. Yet it was. Its presence pressed against her mind until she woke screaming, her body drenched in sweat. She stumbled into the kitchen to find Evelyn sitting at the table, the notebook open, her finger tracing the lines of a strange sigil. The ink pulsed faintly as if alive, as though blood itself ran through the page. "It calls to you, too, doesn't it?" Evelyn asked without looking up. Catherine's knees buckled. She fell into the chair opposite her daughter, unable to speak. She could feel it now even while awake, the slow, patient heartbeat beneath the earth, steady as time itself. In that moment, Catherine understood the truth. This was never about Ashford, never about a cursed book, or a girl who survived the flames. It was about the thing beneath them, and the book was merely its voice. The following weeks blurred into a waking nightmare. Catherine stopped keeping track of the days, for there was no longer a rhythm to life in Ashford. The town was a husk, a place where no bells rang, no markets bustled, no laughter or prayer lingered in the air. Only silence, and beneath it, that steady heartbeat in the ground. Evelyn spent her days with a notebook. She traced its symbols, whispered its words, sometimes laughing as though in conversation with an unseen friend. Catherine tried again and again to seize the book, to tear it from her daughter's hands, but each attempt left her reeling, burned, blinded, or thrown back by a force she could not name. One night, desperate, Catherine begged on her knees, "Please, Evelyn, you are all I have left. Don't let this thing take you away from me." Evelyn's gaze softened, just for a moment. She reached out and touched her mother's cheek. "I am not being taken, Mother. I am being chosen." The words broke Catherine more than any cruelty could. She wept until her throat was raw. But Evelyn only turned back to the book, her small hands trembling with reverence. And then things began to change. The fissure in the square widened, spreading like veins across the ground. From its cracks oozed a black substance, thick as tar, that shimmered faintly under the moon. Crops withered to dust overnight. Crows gathered in flocks so large they blotted out the sky, circling endlessly above the dead town. Travelers who strayed too close vanished. Only their belongings were ever found, scattered near the borders of Ashford as though dropped in haste. Catherine watched it all with mounting terror. She realized the book was no longer simply recording. It was summoning. Each symbol, each mark, was another stroke in a ritual that grew stronger by the day, and her daughter was the vessel through which it was being written. By autumn, the air above Ashford stank of rot. What few animals remained, stray dogs, wandering deer, even birds that strayed too low, were found lifeless, their bodies twisted and hollowed, as though something had drained them from the inside. Catherine buried them when she could, whispering prayers over their graves. Though her voice trembled with doubt, she wondered if God had abandoned Ashford, or if Ashford had been handed over to something older than God. Evelyn grew stranger with each passing day. She no longer ate, no longer slept. Her skin was pale, her lips cracked, yet she never weakened. She carried the book always, as though it were part of her flesh. At times, Catherine would find her daughter standing in the ruins of the chapel, speaking in a voice that was not her own, her words echoing unnaturally in the hollow air. It was during one of these moments that Catherine dared to ask, "Who are you speaking to?" Evelyn's eyes turned black, pupils swallowed in darkness. "Not who," she whispered. "What?" The ground shuddered beneath their feet. Catherine staggered, clinging to the shattered frame of the doorway. The fissure in the square pulsed faintly, as though something beneath was beginning to stir. That night, Catherine dreamed again of the shape beneath the earth. This time it moved. A ripple passed through its impossible body, sending cracks tearing through the soil in her vision. When she woke, her hands were bleeding, though she had no memory of clawing at the walls in her sleep. Terrified, she stumbled outside, only to find Evelyn already awake, watching the horizon. "It is almost time," the girl said, her voice calm, certain. "The book is nearly finished." Catherine stared at her child, at the thing her child had become, and whispered the only question left within her. "What happens when it's done?" Evelyn turned slowly, her eyes reflecting the pale light of the moon, and with a voice colder than the night itself, she replied, "Then the door opens." The door. The word haunted Catherine long after it left her daughter's lips. A door was meant to keep things out, or keep things in, and if the book was a key, then every line Evelyn traced was another turn of the lock. Catherine tried to resist. She burned candles until they wept themselves dry, whispering prayers that cracked her throat. She nailed crosses into the doorframes of her home, scattered salt in every corner, but the protections rotted as quickly as she set them. The wood of the crosses split. The salt blackened. The candles hissed out, their wax pooling like melted flesh. She was not fighting Evelyn. She was not even fighting the book. She was fighting it, and it was winning. The fissure in the town square widened into a gaping wound. From within came a sound that no one could mistake for wind or water, the faint, rhythmic rush of something vast breathing beneath the ground. Each exhale seemed to carry whispers through the streets, voices that begged, pleaded, promised. Catherine heard her husband's voice among them, though he had been gone for years. "Catherine, open it. Set me free." She pressed her hands to her ears and screamed, but the voices never ceased. Meanwhile, Evelyn walked among the ruins like a prophet. The crows followed her in great flocks, landing on rooftops, trees, and broken gravestones as though they were a congregation. The people who once called Ashford home were long gone, yet Evelyn still spoke, softly, steadily, always to something Catherine could not see. One night, Catherine dared to grab her daughter's shoulders and shake her. "If this door opens, Evelyn, it will not free us. It will end us. Can't you see that?" But the girl only smiled faintly, as though she pitied her mother. "It will not end us, mother. It will reveal us. The world is not what you think. We are not what you think. The door does not bring the end. It brings the truth." And Catherine, broken by grief and terror, realized the most horrifying part of all. Her daughter wanted the door to open. The first true sign of the door's awakening came with the storm. It rolled in without warning, black clouds twisting over Ashford like a crown of smoke. There was no thunder, no lightning, only rain. But it was not water. The drops that struck Catherine's skin burned like acid, leaving welts that smoked in the night air. The roofs of the empty houses hissed and split as the storm ate through them, leaving holes that revealed only darkness above. Evelyn did not hide from it. She walked barefoot into the square, the black rain hissing against her skin. But it did not harm her. She stood at the edge of the widening fissure and held the notebook high, her voice rising in chants that no human tongue should have been able to form. The words echoed like stone grinding against stone, low and heavy, resonating in Catherine's chest until she thought her ribs might break. The fissure shuddered. The tar-like substance within boiled, rising and falling with the rhythm of something struggling to break free. For a moment Catherine swore she saw an eye open within the depths, vast, lidless, unblinking. She collapsed, choking on bile, but Evelyn only raised her voice louder. "Almost," the child whispered between chants. "Almost." The rain thickened, turning the soil into a black mire that swallowed anything it touched. Trees sagged, their bark stripped away in sheets. The few structures that still stood crumbled as though centuries had passed in moments. By the time the storm ceased, Ashford was nothing but bones, wooden, stone, and human alike. And in the center of it all, Evelyn knelt at the fissure's edge, her small hands smeared in black, her face radiant with awe. Catherine crawled to her, desperate, clinging to the last shred of hope she had left. "Evelyn, please, stop this. I beg you. You are all I have." Her daughter looked at her at last, and for the first time Catherine saw no trace of the child she had borne. Evelyn's voice was low, steady, and terrible in its calm. "You do not understand, Mother. I am not opening the door. I am the door." The words shattered Catherine's soul. Her daughter, her Evelyn, was no longer merely a vessel. She was the threshold itself, flesh and spirit rewritten into something that should not exist. Catherine recoiled, trembling, yet some desperate part of her refused to surrender. "No," she whispered, clinging to the last fragments of denial. "You are my child. You are mine." Evelyn tilted her head, the faintest trace of a smile ghosting across her pale lips. "I was yours, but I was never only yours. I was written before I was born. The book did not find me. Mother, it made me." Catherine staggered back, the words carving into her like blades. Her knees buckled, but she forced herself upright. If the book had made her child into this thing, then perhaps destroying the book could still undo it. With a cry that tore from the deepest part of her grief, she lunged. Her hand seized a notebook, its surface slick and pulsing as though it were alive. The moment her skin touched it, fire surged through her veins, searing every nerve. She screamed but held fast, wrenching the cursed tome from Evelyn's grasp. The child shrieked, a sound so piercing it split the night air, sending flocks of crows spiraling into the sky. The ground convulsed beneath them, the fissure yawning wider, vomiting shadows that twisted like grasping hands. Catherine stumbled toward the remnants of the chapel, clutching the writhing book. "If I destroy it, if I burn it, maybe I can save her," she gasped more to herself than anyone. But the book fought back, its cover writhed in her grip, tendrils lashing out, clawing at her arms, her face, her chest. Her vision blurred, her flesh tore, and her bones cracked beneath its weight. Behind her, Evelyn's voice rose, not in pain, but in fury. "You cannot stop it, Mother. You cannot stop me." And as Catherine fell through the shattered chapel doors, book clutched her chest, she realized the truth. She might save the world by destroying it, but she would lose her daughter forever. The chapel was no longer a place of God. Its broken altar was swallowed by shadows, its crucifix blackened as though scorched by unseen fire. The stained glass that once told stories of saints and saviors had melted into warped shapes that leered down at Catherine like watching eyes. Still, she staggered forward, clutching the thrashing book. Her blood smeared the cracked stones, marking her path in trembling red lines. She dragged herself toward the altar, praying through clenched teeth. "Please, let fire still answer me. If not for me, then for her." The book screamed, not in words, but in a chorus of voices, hundreds, maybe thousands, wailing in agony, in rage, in hunger. Its pages flapped violently as though caught in a storm, symbols burning and shifting across the parchment, never still. Catherine shoved it onto the altar, snatched a rusted candelabra, and struck flint to wick. The flame sparked weakly, then roared, unnaturally bright. For a moment Catherine believed it would work. The fire consumed the edges of the notebook, the symbols writhing and shriveling in the glow. The chapel walls shuddered with the weight of its cries. But Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her small frame haloed in moonlight. Her eyes were black, endless, her voice deep in the grave. "Do you not understand, Mother? You are not burning the book. You are burning me." The flames faltered. The ink bled from the pages, rising like smoke, curling through the air toward Evelyn. She lifted her hands, and the fire bent to her will, twisting, reshaping, feeding the child instead of destroying her. Catherine fell to her knees, sobbing, as Evelyn stepped inside. The crows followed, perching on the broken pews, their beady eyes fixed on the altar. "You cannot kill what was never alive," Evelyn said softly. "You cannot close what was never meant to be shut. The book is not the key. I am not the vessel. I am the door. And tonight," her voice dropped into a whisper that shook the walls, "tonight it opens." The chapel split apart. Stone cracked like bone, the floor buckling as a fissure tore its way through the altar, through Catherine, through Ashford itself. The air turned thick, heavy, filled with a stench of rot and iron. Every candle guttered out at once, plunging the world into blackness, lit only by the glow of Evelyn's eyes. The crows shrieked, rising in a cyclone above the chapel, their wings blotting out what little light remained. The sound of them was deafening, like 1,000 screams carried on a single breath. And then it came. From the fissure rose a presence that was not flesh, not shadow, not dream. It was older than language, older than time. A vast shape pressed against reality, straining to emerge, its edges rippling as though the world itself could not decide how to contain it. The sound of its breathing shook the stones. Evelyn raised her arms. Her small frame was swallowed in lightless radiance, her hair whipping in the unseen wind, her voice carrying the weight of prophecy. "Behold, the door is open." Catherine crawled forward, broken, bloodied, and trembling. "Evelyn, please fight it. You are stronger than this. You are my child." For the first time, Evelyn faltered. Her gaze softened, a flicker of something human breaking through the abyss. For a single heartbeat, the presence hesitated, its form shivering. Catherine seized that moment. With the last of her strength, she pulled the iron crucifix from the ruined wall, its edges jagged and rusted, and drove it to the book still smoldering on the altar. The chapel exploded with light. The fissure shrieked as though the earth itself were in agony. The presence recoiled, pulled back into the depths, its form unraveling into nothingness. The crows scattered, vanishing into night. Evelyn collapsed, the glow leaving her eyes, her small body crumpling to the floor. Catherine crawled to her, cradling her in trembling arms. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Evelyn's lips parted. Her voice was faint, fragile, no longer layered with otherworldly power. "Mother, the door is never truly closed." And with that, her breath ceased. The fissure sealed, leaving only scarred earth where it had been. The night grew quiet once more. But in that silence lingered a promise, a whisper carried on the wind. It would wait, and one day it would open again. Ashford was buried in silence, its chapel reduced to rubble, its people swallowed by history, its secret hidden beneath soil and time. The world moved on, but the earth remembers. And so do we, for every sealed door leaves behind a key. Every silence conceals a whisper, and every forgotten town waits for the day someone dares to remember. If you have walked with me through the shadows tonight, if you have felt the weight of Catherine's grief and the chill of the door that should never open, then join us. Subscribe to Shadows of History. Turn the bell so you do not miss when the next door creaks open, because the past is not dead. It is only waiting. Candle, until next time, remain watchful, for the shadows are closer than you think.